welcome to a crypto special of the Green Shoot series. Our conversation today, as you probably guessed, is all about the wonderful world of crypto. So, whether you love it or hate it, it's here to stay and it's not going away anytime soon. There's been a lot of activity this year and we're going to hope to delve into some of that activity and what the future holds. So we'll be covering specifically a few topics that are driving and impacting crypto at the moment, from competition to integration, financial inclusion, and clearly, as regulators, we'll be covering regulation. So while these topics have been covered to death over the years, the difference right now is the current market backdrop, the environment that we're currently living in. It's absolutely game-changing. And so this changes the narrative and the dialogue that we're having right now. And so we want to make sure this is a super lively debate and really cutting edge to give you some food for thought. And we're very fortunate today to be joined by 3 stars that are flipping the script and breaking new ground. In our very own studio, we have Mike, who as a child wanted to be a professional baseball player. Do you still play today?
Unfortunately, no, you need 9 on each side to play. And we can't get that many people now. But I still use the baseball strategy in business, right? Everybody contributes. There's a role and responsibility. There's offense and defense. So it's ingrained in my business.
Okay, in that case, when we're allowed to meet in more than 5 people, we'll look to arrange a game, maybe next year sometime.
We hope so.
Fantastic. So, you know, the community is clearly glad that you've turned your attentions to cryptocurrency. And, you know, in your spare time, just to let the audience know, in his spare time, outside of aspiring to be a baseball player, Mike is the co-founder and CEO of Liquid Group. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you.
And dialing in from the US, we have Dante, who is the vice chairman and head of policy and communications at Libra Association. As a child, Dante was inspired by the United Nations and always wanted to be a diplomat. So following our conversation yesterday, Dante, I was quite inspired by an article that you sent me called The Great Correction. And so what I'd like to do is maybe at some point during this conversation, we'll pick up on some of those topics. And I believe one of my colleagues is going to add that article into the chat functionality so anyone at home can get to read that article and maybe share some feedback with you as well. Thanks for joining us, Dante.
Thank you, Pat. Great to be with you.
And dialing in from the US, we have Tyler, who is the co-founder and CEO at Gemini. As a child, Tyler always wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. So you must be living the dream right now, Tyler.
Feels like it. So my dad's a tech entrepreneur. He has a software company. It's B2B. So I sort of joke that I grew up in a startup, going to his office after school. So it came pretty naturally to me. I thought that's what everyone did. So that's what I wanted to be.
Great. Yep, that's a dream of mine too. So maybe one day for me. But thanks for joining us and staying up late, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My pleasure.
So as with all Green Shoots episodes, please make sure you post your Q&A or your questions in the Q&A functionality, and we'll do our very best to answer as many of those throughout the session. And so that leaves me onto my next area, which I'd like to introduce my co-interviewer, Jo, who is the Queen of Payments at MAS, who heads up our payments team. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks very much, Pat, and very happy to see our 3 speakers today. Mike with us in the studio, and we have online Tyler and Dante. Very happy to have them here with us in our discussion. So today we'll break it down into 3 topics as Pat introduced. The first one would be competition or integration. The next one would be on financial inclusion. And then finally, we'll go to the very exciting topic of regulations, you know, very close to my heart as well. So let's dive in on the first one on the competition or integration. And we've seen a cryptocurrency competition intensify with new players and new tokens. So all this started, well, you know, way back a decade ago. There was just Bitcoin, and at that time I think it wasn't even cryptocurrency, it was called virtual currency, right? And I was chatting with Mike, and Mike was saying that he set up Liquid Group in 2014, and I think Gemini also around the same time, Tyler. And then a couple of years back, we were introduced in a very big way to, of course, Dante's project, right? So with that, with Libra, then we'll also have seen the great movement of stable coins, and even central banks are coming into the fore with CBDCs. So my first question would be like, how will a competition play out in the coming years for crypto assets? Or will we see more collaboration among crypto players? So how do you think that will play out? And maybe Tyler, you got a view on that?
Sure. So first, I think the problem we're trying to solve, which is to make money better, is such a huge problem. And it's so global that it's hard to imagine that one company would do it alone. So I think even though it can feel or look at times like we're all competing, I think we're on the same team for the same goal, and we're actually helping each other a lot more than we think. In terms of cryptocurrencies, I don't think there's going to be so many of them. Like, I don't think it's a menu of 1,000 necessarily, because money tends to smaller numbers because of network effects, and it's such a social thing that is like a network, like a social network. You don't need like 1,000 of them, but I do think there's probably at least going to be a couple big ones for some period of time, because there's different engineering trade-offs. And it's hard to be everything to everybody. So I think I think you'll see more than one.
Interesting thought. And Dante, I'm sure you have a response to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's great to see you, Joe, and great to be a part of today's conversation. So, you know, on the score of competition, I really do believe, I completely concur with Tyler that, you know, at some level, we're in an all ships rising moment, that for the last 11 years, this asset class has really come of age. And what you're now starting to see happen is the regulatory conversation, the public policy conversation is starting to converge on what I think are some first principles that are very unique to cryptocurrencies and digital currencies. Is it really your money if you have to ask someone to spend it, and if you have to pay someone to hold it? And I think part of what this movement is all about is about empowerment, which I know will be a subtext of part of our conversation today when we start talking about financial inclusion. And the missing link in the puzzle is to ensure greater regulatory clarity around the world, and to the extent we can, to really try to drive harmonization. That's what will turn this era of competition into an era of actual change and digital transformation of both money and, more importantly, how people can spend it and send it to one another.
Yeah, so very similar thoughts there. And I thought maybe Mike, you have a view on this as well. And so turning to Mike in the studio on this particular question about whether you are looking to forge greater collaboration in the market here. I know that you're very active in Singapore.
I think, like it or not, we will collaborate, right? I think the fintech industry, compared to like traditional legacy business, they're all more willing to work together because we have a common cause. I think the challenge is that it's not a level playing field. Again, I'm using this baseball analogy, but when it's a level playing field, there's a set of rules that people can play with, right? So people can work together, collaborate, because they understand what they can do, what they cannot. And that part is still missing on a global scale. And unless that happens, it's going to be extremely difficult to really find ways to collaborate in a common way.
I see. Okay, so actually the regulator also has a part to play. We'll come back to that
Absolutely.
bit right at the end. I know Mike has some interesting thoughts to share on that. So staying with Mike, are crypto assets like stablecoins and CBDCs on track to integrate with mainstream payment systems, you think, or maybe even displace fiat in the, say, next few years or the coming decade?
So there's a difference between next few years and the coming decade.
Yeah.
And also, crypto assets is it's a large definition. But when you look at stable coins and CBDCs, more on the currency side, absolutely it's going to come mainstream. It's faster, better, cheaper, and it will be adopted. I think the challenge is the framework around it, right? So if it's categorized as a cryptocurrency or a digital currency. From the single penny or dollar you want to spend, there's going to be like KYC and these regulatory requirements that make it very difficult to use it as a payment, which needs to be fast, secure, and the utility needs to be there. And until that part gets solved, it's going to be difficult for it to be really integrated into mainstream and to be used outside of this digital ecosystem.
I see. Yeah. So on that point, I wanted to turn to Dante because you know, you're developing the Libra token, which in many ways is, for the second iteration at least, looks a lot more like a stable coin. So just wanted to hear what you think about this integration into mainstream payment systems. I thought that was part of a big push for Libra as well.
Yeah, so there's no question that the current design really grabs all of the best properties of stablecoins, and in some respects is trying to push the boundary even further in terms of the type of financial security, prudential oversight, and really alignment with regulators. As you know very well, the Libra project, since it was first announced, is seeking a pathway of permission rather than forgiveness. So we're really trying to get the entire regulatory regime about this project in line as a precondition of launching it. But I also think, you know, to the points that Mike was raising a moment ago, I'm encouraged by the direction of travel. As you know very well, something like 70% of the world's central banks are thinking about CBDC, central bank digital currencies. And so over time, the stablecoin construct becomes a unique bridge or even a hybrid opportunity of building that type of public-private collaboration that we would want to see. I advocate for a vigorously competitive wallet environment and continuous public sector oversight over monetary policy and regulatory strategy around these types of assets, such that supports internationalization and greater use of these networks.
On that point, I wanted to turn to Tyler to ask about, because Gemini hosts a range of cryptocurrencies from stable coins to the more traditional types. So wanted Tyler's views on what do you think are the biggest gaps in the current payment ecosystem that maybe stable coins or maybe even the more traditional, and I use traditional quote unquote, it's not that long a history, but traditional cryptocurrencies can fill.
Yeah, so I think that our money doesn't work like email. Gemini has a stablecoin, a Gemini dollar, that works on the Ethereum network. And we actually have a functionality called Gemini Pay on our mobile app that leverages the current infrastructure, payment infrastructure in the US at many retailers around the country. So I think the goal here is to make money global and work 24/7, 365, like your email, free, and you know, go anywhere in the world. And ultimately, that's what blockchains can do. My view personally is that Bitcoin is more like a digital gold or a gold 2.0. It's more of a store of value. It's something you want to save because the price appreciates over time, at least in my experience. If you look at the Bitcoin pizza first transaction, that's an $80 million, $100 million pizza today with the same amount of Bitcoin because the price goes up. So you kind of want to spend things that lose their value, not too quickly, but oftentimes like a government fiat currency or something that mimics that actually inflates and loses some value. You don't want to hold on to that because you're actually losing your wealth. So that makes a better medium exchange currency. So different cryptocurrencies provide different value. Ether, a lot of people say it's sort of like the digital oil of the Ethereum network. It allows you to buy computing power on that operating system. And stablecoins like Gemini, like Libra are trying to be things that you spend. And so we try and offer a full menu of assets to our customers. One of our biggest markets is actually Singapore. We try and do it in a regulated way that's safe, secure, reliable, and easy to engage with. My earliest experience in cryptocurrency was with Mt. Gox. I luckily didn't lose any money, but it informed me on like what had to change. And so we built Gemini as that response. And there's many currencies vying for different trying to solve different problems, and we try and support all of the legitimate ones that are trying to do that.
Yeah, and so on that, I was observing a common thread amongst the various types of stablecoin projects and even the very earliest cryptocurrencies, and that's really the goal of financial inclusion. So, Pat, that's something you're interested in?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's absolutely close to my heart, and it seems that every cryptocurrency ambition has a financial inclusion angle. And so whether that's to kind of promise to kind of level the playing field or even take friction out of a legacy system that's been in place many, many years. And so, on that note, I kind of want to see what the audience thinks right now. And so we're going to flash up an audience poll. And the question that we're going to ask the audience, and I'll get our panelists to kind of comment on this as well, is what in your view is the key challenge impeding crypto assets from realizing its full potential for financial inclusion? So if the audience at home can kind of just vote, as it were, and then we'll discuss that shortly. So while we're waiting for this audience poll to be concluded, I kind of want to delve into, the tough times that we've all faced this year and society and humanity has faced and, the world is going through right now. And how has the cryptocurrency kind of sector changed? And for the good, for the bad, and the implications. And maybe we can start with Mike on this. What has your experience been from a market perspective on crypto this year?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting topic, because what we've observed with the coronavirus, a COVID-19 pandemic, and how people have to stay home. However, the technology gap is actually kind of lessening the gap, and it's bridging. Right, and this technology is going into money, right? Digital money, cryptocurrencies, stablecoins. Yes, stablecoin was around. It started 2 years ago, but now it's so much more ingrained in this industry. And how people stay home, but they have access to capital, they have access to technology, and that's the one. Despite nationalism and all these gaps that are happening in the geopolitical world, from a technology and from an investment perspective, it's very active. So from us as an exchange, we see that interest, the volume, and it's not only about investments. Now people want yield on their stable coins and crypto. So you see that evolving. So it's a positive from our industry perspective, and I think it will lessen the gap that we have in this global pandemic.
Sure. Now that's really refreshing to hear, and I suppose it'd be good, Dante, to get your view from what you're seeing from stateside.
Yeah, I think the conversation, to Mike's point, really has the pandemic has reinforced our level of dependency and requirement for technology to be a difference maker. Here in the United States, for example, the very first round of government stimulus to prop up the economy called for the creation of a digital dollar and a digital wallet for all US citizens. And although that was a very short-lived provision, the conversation domestically has been much more long-lasting. And we see across the spectrum, not only domestic, but international requirements and needs on the score of underbanked populations, people who are on the margin of the financial system. We've run out of coins in parts of the country. And so if you go to a retail store, of course, obeying social distancing requirements, in some instances, they're giving you a loyalty card or some other form of change because of the limitations of physical cash. So I don't think of these types of technologies as competition with the existing financial system. If anything, we're trying to help complete it. And we could see today in this pandemic where the gaps are very obvious.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I think, one of the key topics that we're going to be covering at the end of the year at the Singapore FinTech Festival is around the recovery. And, importantly, what do we need to do as a private sector and the public sector to come together to essentially help society get back on its feet in 2021. And so to that point, it would be good to kind of get your views on this, Tyler, about what role can cryptocurrency play in getting the economy back on its feet in 2021 and beyond?
Well, ultimately, I think that a lot of people are seeing cryptocurrency as an alternative to the current system. In the US, we've been racking up a lot of debt. We obviously, like the rest of the world, had to print a lot of money to get through this pandemic. And people are sort of starting to question, like, hey, the system doesn't look so good. What are my alternatives? So we're seeing the gold story of Bitcoin really resonate with people. And also this idea, and so another tool we've done is we've lowered interest rates to zero, and in some places in the world they're negative. And so if you put your money in a bank, you're neutral, or maybe you're actually losing money as a saver. But you can actually, there are places in crypto where you can earn a yield of something like 5 or 6% pretty conservatively in DeFi, and much more if you want to get riskier. Obviously, this is not an investment advice, but it's actually possible there. And then there's other cryptocurrencies where you can stake or bond your cryptocurrency holding and contribute to the network like a miner, and actually earn something like 5 to 10% there. So cryptocurrency is providing a store of value asset in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of not losing your value to all this money printing, but also an opportunity to earn yield. What's interesting is that, yes, this has been a crazy time in the world, but it's actually so much development is happening in crypto, on these blockchains, in DeFi, and all over the place. And so crypto is continuing to soldier ahead and push the innovation boundary. And I think a lot of people are seeing this as a really welcome, hopeful light alternative. And remember, Bitcoin was born in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. So this is very much a reaction to mismanagement of the fiat government-controlled system. And so I think it just provides a great alternative and checks and balance. And so I think it just makes me very hopeful.
Before I come on to you, Dante, I just want to see your views, Mike, because you were nodding profusely there. And what needs to happen? How can crypto help society get back on its feet in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so I would probably step back a little bit, right? So this current crisis, the pandemic, has really kind of showed that people don't trust now, right? They don't trust the government. People don't trust the media. People don't trust the vaccine, or there's fake news and all these things.
You trust us, though, surely.
Exactly. So we're part of the problem as well. And that's why, especially, for example, like emerging markets in developing countries, they're going towards digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. It's not government owned. It's not central bank owned. Like Bitcoin, as Tyler mentioned, it started during the great global financial crisis in 2008 and 9. And now this pandemic is actually spurring people to gravitate towards that as well. And I think rebuilding trust is what's important for the economy as a whole to come back, right? And I think cryptocurrencies and digital assets is one of the keys, because if you don't trust your money, if you don't trust the central bank printed money, what are you going to trust, right? And I think there's a long way to go, but I think digital assets can be that that trusted asset that people can go, and that's why you see that growth and excitement coming back.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And so now on to you, Dante. So in your article that you sent to me yesterday, The Great Correction, you make reference to how do we get families back on their feet in 2021 or in the future. And so, I just kind of want to delve into aspects of that article, but in particular, how can cryptocurrency play a role in this great correction?
Yeah, so, well, thank you for the honorable mention of that, Pat. I appreciate it. If you think about the world pre-pandemic, we have 1.7 billion people who were unbanked, 1.3 billion who are underbanked, and yet 1 billion of them have access to an internet-connected mobile phone. And so if you were thinking of crypto as competition with the system and unregulated and on the margins of the rules-based financial system, then connecting those dots would be perceived as a threat. Today, the world's most important cash flow is cross-border peer-to-peer remittances. On average, it costs 7%, and it's an incredibly slow, exacting process to send money to family around the world if you're part of the diaspora population. Post-pandemic, I think this is crypto's shining moment, is to really identify not only remittance corridors where transaction costs can be lowered in the same way that instant messaging has lowered the barrier of access to information around the world. I think this is our shining moment to innovate our way through this crisis and begin to make some more deliberate connections that are peer-to-peer. And for the regulators and other stakeholders around the world, not to view empowering those types of cash flows as a threat, but rather as an opportunity. We need more foreign exchange to arrive at designated beneficiaries faster, and we need to start establishing these types of connections and legitimizing them. But for large-scale digital transformation, for which blockchain and cryptocurrencies are a part of that puzzle, I don't see a world full of particularly great ideas on how to make these types of transactions more efficient. So that's just one example that I think we should be hopeful about in 2021.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, innovating through a crisis is certainly the way that we're looking at things in Singapore. And, we're seeing that in large parts of the world now, that this is our go-to moment. It's a shining moment to try and create something new, something different. And so just on that note, I kind of wanted to bring up the audience poll. It'll be interesting to see what the audience thinks around, what's been impeding the development of cryptocurrency for financial inclusion. And, just want to say, what are your thoughts on this, Mike? You can see the audience have kind of largely been in sync. There's two kind of clear winners, but is that what you expected?
No, actually, yes. I think, but I'm surprised that the risk concerns are actually the smallest among the other challenges.
Is that progress, or we've just got a crypto-heavy crowd?
Well, I think it's still maturing, so people might not understand what real risk is associated with crypto. Mm-hmm. But it's okay when you think about it. It's 2009. It's only 2020 now, so it's 11 years, right? So a decade since Bitcoin came, and when I co-founded Liquid, it was 2014. Ethereum wasn't there. So when you look at the history of digital assets, it's roughly a decade, or maybe just 5 years in terms of people starting to understand what it is, right? So when you look at that, it's very much a condensed history. But when you ask anybody, at least they've heard of Bitcoin or crypto, right? That's a big progress. So now let's make sure that people understand what it is. What are the risks associated with it? What can you really do with it? So it is all about educating the market, and it's not only us as service providers, but it's also governments, intergovernmental organization, media as well. It's going to take a little bit more time, but we're in the right direction.
Yeah, I was going to say that even my father, who's in his late 70s, he's even asked me about cryptocurrency. So we've had conversations which a few years ago, I don't think that would ever have happened. So
the awareness is there. Yes.
It's definitely growing. And so Tyler, it'd be good to kind of get your thoughts on these results as well. Is that what you were expecting, or anything surprising, in particular on the risk side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always hard to know what, it's like in marketing, you have to hear something 7 times, and it's hard to know when that moment is, when someone clicks and has the aha moment. But I would actually include a question or a topic that wasn't in the poll, and that is, if you're not in the traditional system, it's actually hard to get into the new system. So if you don't have a bank account, how do you fund? It's hard to fund your Gemini account with a wire or a Swift wire, or a debit card coming soon. So if you're not part of, unfortunately, like, it's easier to get into cryptocurrency if you are already established in the current banking system. We don't have a way currently to accept a customer who wants to deposit M-Pesa, or a customer who, sometimes the customers are in jurisdictions that may be sanctioned and they need it the most. There's an authoritarian regime, but they can't get access to banking services, or if they can, there's capital controls. So we need to think long and hard, exchanges like Gemini and everyone else in the industry, how we can get to those people and onboard them. And in many cases, it requires them to be paid by their employer in cryptocurrency, which is maybe easy or not easy. It requires them maybe to meet someone in person to transfer cash to cryptocurrency, which is a bit dangerous. So it's hard to people who aren't in the current financial system. It's actually it's not like, oh, just turn up to Gemini in person and deposit your cash. We don't have that ability, and so it's actually much easier. So the advantages keep happening to the people who have the advantages, unfortunately. And so we just have to think hard, and we will continue to think hard of how we can change that as a company and play our part.
I think we should have added an extra kind of option in the audience poll. And clearly interoperability is essential here, but interoperability for the masses as well. And so I think on that note, before we move on, it'd be good to get Dante's thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler hit a really powerful point right on the head, which is that, the current system works really well if you were so fortunate to have won the birth or postal code lottery. And so in that vein, regulation being a close tie with people's understanding of crypto doesn't surprise me, because one of the regulatory requirements we all have to contend with, but which would be particularly true of payment networks and stablecoins being used for payments, are KYC requirements, know your customer requirements, and a range of international compliance and other sanctions that at some level are requirements to keep the financial system safe, but on another, unless we find more modern ways of updating them, they will continue to preclude people, billions of people, in fact, from gaining more access to the system. So this is an area of opportunity as I see it.
No, that makes sense. And so that actually segues quite nicely to a key topic that Joe's going to talk through, the wonderful world of regulation and cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I was going to say that Dante did a very good job of his being a diplomat here, providing us with a very nice segue into this topic, which is when I saw the audience poll come up to say that still maturing regulations was close second, I thought that you're speaking to personal pain here, because when we were drafting the payment services bill, as it was at that time, very intense 2 years, which covers both fiat as well as cryptocurrencies, there was very little to follow, emulate, or copy from that. So we had to build it from scratch. And so I see Mike nodding here, because every time I meet Mike, we have a really robust discussion about the global regulatory environment for cryptocurrencies. So please share with the audience all the gems that you've shared with me over the past couple of years.
Oh my, well, thank you. It's been a challenging but fulfilling journey, right? You have to enjoy this journey because it's been also painful at the same time. So when I co-founded Liquid in 2014, there was no stable coin. It was only Bitcoin. So as an exchange, you had to have on-ramp and off-ramp of fiat, which means you had to work with banks. So we were always pro-regulation from day one. Actually, if you were not, you couldn't operate an exchange. And also being in Asia and Japan being the first global jurisdiction to implement crypto regulation, it was natural for us. So we were the first global exchange to be regulated in Japan. And it comes with a lot of challenges as a startup to comply with. I think the biggest challenge, and I always share with you, is that it's different by jurisdictions and government. In Japan, we play by the rules, right? And they have robust KYC, AML, reporting, security, all the things that are necessary to protect the end consumer. But that's not same across different jurisdictions. And Singapore is the next jurisdiction that is coming into, and we've applied for the license here as well. I think the challenge is there's common regulatory frameworks, but then there's things that are unique to each government. And that's the challenge, right? So my whole goal or my mission to start Liquid was to provide financial services to all, which means we want to decrease the friction and to allow everybody to come in. However, the traditional world regulatory framework makes it difficult. And I'm not saying that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But then it needs to be consistent across every player, because there's this sunrise issue where jurisdictions that are doing well are actually making it more difficult for players who want to play by the rules to get the benefit, while there's others who play outside of these jurisdictions, offshore. And from a customer perspective, do you want to sign up with Liquid where you have to provide government IDs, proof of address, bank statements, source of funds, and all those, versus you can open an account and start trading immediately with another exchange or service? And unless that becomes a level playing field and there's proper carrots and sticks, it's going to be extremely difficult, as it goes back to the first one, for people to be collaborative, working together so that the industry itself matures.
Yeah, and I think Dante will have a good story here as well, because Dante, your tentacles are everywhere in the world for Libra. The ambition is set so high. How are you going to respond to what Mike is saying here in terms of how you've been navigating the global landscape on cryptocurrency regulation?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is you have to start with some foundational principles. And, you know, in our view, we have to harmonize the type of regulatory and operational expectations of the project to the highest standard, not the lowest standard. All too often, not only in crypto, but in other sectors, you have a lot of regulatory arbitrage taking place. And so operators, investors, and others are looking for the path of least resistance. It would be no surprise, Joe and colleagues, that, you know, Libra has, of course, in many respects, accelerated a global conversation. Pre-pandemic, that meant that I logged thousands of miles, hundreds of hours in dialogue with all types of stakeholders, from central banks to public hearings around the world. And I think with that, hopefully, will come an era in which, you know, groups like the Financial Stability Board, which Singapore is co-chairing, start to develop a set of ground rules, minimum operating standards, and expectations that don't only put the burden on the private sector, but also put a burden on the public authorities on how to appropriately harmonize and regulate this asset class. I would maintain that if we want to restart our economies around the world and get through the COVID pandemic, we really have to provide innovators, operators, investors, and others an opportunity to get onto the 21st century. And in all things in our lives, but for payments, value, and the transfer of value at global scale, technology has been a difference maker. But for the technologists to find a home, and a home that provides regulatory certainty, I think that's one of the missing links in the puzzle. And so Libra and our efforts, I think, are contributing to that conversation, but we're still looking for our own starting line.
Right, and before we move to, say, look at what else the audience has for us in terms of questions, just wanted to hear Tyler's thoughts on this particular question as well, on regulatory frameworks, because I know that Gemini has been looking to expand also in Asia, particularly in Singapore. We had the pleasure of meeting the Singapore team as well. So Tyler, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'm actually seeing this question a lot in the Q&A. When is Gemini coming to Singapore? And the answer is Gemini is actually already open and available in Singapore. We have applied for the license as well, like Mike's team has. We have a head of Singapore and an office there. So we have a footprint, we're growing, we're open. So please come join us. But I will say, and I'm happy I'm talking to a regular about this, the road for people who want to do it the right way has been too hard, has been too difficult. And our mistake has been asking for permission, not forgiveness. And it's not a mistake, but to be encumbered by doing the right thing, it's been very hard to innovate at the speed of the market. And it's doubly hard when you see other people not playing by the rules and actually building businesses quicker and faster. So I think it's really important for regulators to hear that. to really balance the safety and with the ability for startups to innovate. So it's that tension between regulating enough and not too much where you hurt innovation. And this is happening a lot in the US, but it's also happening all in the world. Like if you just look at Libra, you know, they're doing some great stuff. They're trying to innovate and change things, and we should be celebrating that as a company, but instead politicians haul them in front of government, are antagonistic, ask all these questions, when they're just trying to do what Gemini's already done. There's a legal path forward. It's called the Gemini dollar. And there should be a legal path forward for them, and we should as well, and we should celebrate innovation. We shouldn't shun it and be afraid of it. So I think unfortunately to date, it's been too difficult for people who pick up the phone and come in the front door and talk to regulators and say, hey, we want to do this the right way. And I think most people in the space are here for the right reasons, but it's been really painful. It's been expensive. It's been hard to take the training wheels off and actually innovate. That is changing, but I think that's a really important message that all of the regulators around the world should hear, because if they don't get it right, companies just won't talk to them. They'll go offshore and customers will follow them, and then they get burned. And all of these issues with hackings and whatever, a lot of that's happened outside of regulation. And I think a lot of it's also been pushed outside of regulation because the regulators had been too draconian and too heavy-handed. So we really need to, if we want the growth and the promise to happen similar to the internet, we have to be light touch and thoughtful. And when you see good actors who are there for the right reason, it shouldn't be guilty till proven innocent. It should be like, okay, like let's give them a chance and see if they can do this. So I'll sort of stop there with my rant. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler, for the very passionate thoughts there about regulation and providing us with very good sound bites that we can in future, you know, quote from and also play back to regulators who are thinking about seriously about regulation in this field. I think that's something that resonates a lot with the community as well. I see some good questions here about that. Pat, have you chosen your favorite one?
So yes, I absolutely have. Yeah. I think it segues quite nicely from what you're saying, Tyler, to a degree. And that's there's a question here from the audience around how would the introduction of CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies, by governments such as China's, but there's others around the world, impact what's currently going on. So how would that impact yourself, Mike? And then I'm going to ask Dante as well, in particular around the Libra Association.
So it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It should have happened earlier. And again, the definition of CBDC.
Legitimacy as well.
Yes, correct. So from our perspective as an exchange, the more ways for our customers to access the exchange, which is a digital asset exchange, is something that we embrace. And we welcome all forms of assets. And within that, CBDC is something that we will love to happen. And it is going to happen, right? And people want, because at the end of the day, yes, there is going to become a world where you can pay goods and services with your preferred digital asset. But until that day comes, at a local level, it will always be that national currency. And for that digital transformation to happen at the money level, at local, I think CBDC is the right way to go. And there's obviously been like e-money and all these prepaid cards and all these things that were different form factors of the digital currency. And now it's happening in a way that it's controlled by the government. And I would hope that this is kind of the gateway into more utility and usage of not only CBDC, but it kickstarts the other digital assets as well.
Thanks, Mike. And Dante, so what's your view on this question? You know, CBDCs by other governments, and you know, how will that impact Libra Association's strategy, I suppose, going forward?
Yeah, well, on the one front, I think if you take a read of the CBDC developments around the world, the vast majority of it falls into two camps. One camp is that it's still very abstract and therefore, you know, remains an area of study. The other camp is a choice around design, which leaves the CBDC innovation at the wholesale level. And so I think for the use case and for the big social problem we're trying to solve, which is, you know, insidious levels of financial exclusion around the world, even with the advent of CBDC, you would still have billions of people fundamentally unbanked or underbanked or outside of the financial system, especially when you take into consideration the lack of interoperability between payment networks. So I actually see, and I think the association sees, the advent of CBDC as a compelling innovation, and one in which we would like to have interoperability to support public sector priorities and public sector innovation. And so we've said on the record that, you know, in a world in which CBDCs existed from trusted central banks, it would, in some respects, Libra would potentially forego the need to stand up a stablecoin design of its own and potentially plug in directly into central bank issued digital currencies. So I think this is also an area of coexistence rather than competition.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Dante. And before I go into one other question here, which is quite interesting, back to the topic of financial inclusion, just wanted to hear if Tyler, any thoughts about CBDC as well?
Yeah, look, I think we wouldn't be here if government currencies weren't, ready for the internet age. So I think the whole purpose of cryptocurrency was to sort of kick government currencies into shape and get them more innovative and working with the times. You know, we live in the information age. The internet has been around since at least the commercial internet since the early 90s. And yet money moves 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Imagine if your email was open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Now, we might enjoy that because we'd get some of our time back and our sanity back, but it's absurd that that's actually the way money works. And if it's a bank holiday on Monday, it's not happening. And try and get money out of, into certain far reaches of the world is very difficult still. Yet we know how easy it is to send an email, and money is ultimately just information. So I applaud any movement that helps get fiat currencies out of the dark ages and into the modern times of the internet. You know, in Gemini, we see both paths, right? People deposit fiat currencies on one leg and they withdraw cryptocurrency on another leg, or they deposit cryptocurrency on one leg and they withdraw fiat currency on another leg off the exchange. One side, the cryptocurrency leg, works like email, how money should work in 2020. The other side does not work like email. It works like banker money, and it's very slow. It's not digital. And like I said, it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, if you're lucky. And if you're trying to go from, send money from the US to Sri Lanka, it's probably much longer, huge fees, and good luck if it ever gets there. So I applaud these moments. I'm happy that crypto has spurred central banks into building better money, and we welcome it.
So Tyler, that has brought us very nicely to the last question that we have time for here, which is a financial inclusion sort of question. And it's quite interesting because it's also quite practical. And I'm looking at Mike here because I know that you have inroads into Indonesia, where Liquid Group is, and there are practical challenges here. And what this question brought up was that around the infrastructure that supports cryptocurrencies, of course, you need to have basic things like internet access, things like that. So what are the challenges you see your customers face, or what do you think needs to up its game in the infrastructure field in order to support the next growth in cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so infrastructure.
Yes.
Right. So it's when I look at infrastructure, it could be on technical infrastructure, and there's other infrastructure or the ecosystem that needs to be
Yes.
ready.
Yes.
Right. For example, based in Singapore and Japan and Asia, we have a lot of customers from developing countries. That was also the reason I started Liquid. I was in India at the time. And as you know, 30%, 40% of the adult population didn't have access to banks, or they were underbanked. But they all had a smartphone now. And as SoftBank, I was a former SoftBank employee at the time, we were handing out smartphones with data plans. So for a customer that didn't have a bank account, they still had a smartphone. And if you had a digital wallet and if you had Bitcoin, that was financial inclusion. So that was my aha moment, right? So our customers, from a sign-up perspective, it's mostly emerging markets, right? But from a trading and verified users, revenue, it's all people like in Japan and developed countries. The challenge that we have is from the funnel of sign-up to actually people who get verified and start trading, we lose about 80 to 90% of our signups to verification because they cannot provide the necessary requirements to be verified. And the single biggest holdback is the proof of address. Right? People might have an ID and they can snap their selfie and we can do that liveness test and everything. But then once you ask for the proof of address, you lose them and they'll never come back, right? They'll go to another exchange that doesn't require that. So what can technology do to help that? And we don't have an answer. I mean, technology is there. For example, if you could trace through location-based services that this person always goes back to this place at night, that's their address. And if that kind of is the same as the one that they've reported, to me, that's a proof of address. However, the regulatory framework will not allow that, right? You need a 3-month utility bill or a phone bill, and that doesn't help. So the technical infrastructure to allow financial inclusion and the regulatory infrastructure to allow that, there's still a big gap there. And unless we can bridge that, despite my mission and how I aspire this to be financial inclusion, there's a big digital divide, and there's also this financial inclusion is actually going to be worse because of these hurdles for people to sign up and get verified.
Yeah. So I was going to ask Dante, is that your perspective as well? So which is more important, like a national digital identity, for example, or plain old good internet access ubiquity to, make money more democratic, in your view?
Yeah, well, there's no question. I mean, Mike hit the nail on the head that for anybody to get access to digital currencies or payment systems, there are a couple of condition precedents that need to be in place. And the first one is access to reliable internet. In the white paper that Pat mentioned at the outset, The Great Correction, this is one of the observations that it's very hard to extend any of these types of networks and this type of infrastructure in the context of a crisis. But on the other side of a crisis, it's very easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to observe where you had vulnerability and where the infrastructure failed to perform. So around the world, we have more than 1 billion people who have no form of transferable or portable identification. This is another sort of layer 0 application for technologies like blockchain and biometrics, and there's a number of very compelling projects and use cases around the world. I think what projects like Libra does and what this type of conversation sort of evokes is the opportunity to then serve billions of people and to do so in an economically viable way, because you're breaking free of the traditional brick and mortar infrastructure and the 9 to 5 hours that Tyler was speaking of a moment ago in terms of providing beneficial services and financial services to billions of people who are on the margins. But you do have to get the infrastructure question right, and that's why we think of the Libra project has chosen an open source design in no small measure to spur that wave of responsible financial services innovation.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time left. Any final thoughts on this? Any response to what Dante said?
Well, I think it's a great point. You need a data connection, a way to verify. I know Singapore has the Sing sign-on, or maybe I'm getting that wrong, but there's a country way to do that from the government. and then a way to fund so you can buy the cryptocurrencies. So it's data connection, identity verification, in a way to fund your account. And the last two are hard to do. I feel like Libra may be able to help with that because Facebook Libra knows the identity of a lot of people in these places, or has a better chance of getting there, getting to that understanding who those people are than other people. And there's no way that a Wells Fargo branch is going to be built anytime soon in the corners of the world that need this the most. So we've got to get a clever way, either governments have to become more sophisticated like MAS in like Singapore, and sort of spread that sophistication so that their citizens can be identified, but also clever ways as companies to help identify people and figure out ways where people can maybe deposit their cash that they get or their paycheck to actually be able to fund their account at Gemini or wherever, and then be able to get into the infrastructure of decentralized finance, whether it's the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain, and have their digital wallet and be able to bank themselves, be their own bank. That is the promise of cryptocurrency, is that it removes the brick and mortar, all of that infrastructure and costs, replaces it with the math of these cryptocurrency networks. So software replaces the brick and mortar that's never going to get there. But how do we get people into these software nations where they can bank themselves? And that's actually still proves to be a challenging point, as we've mentioned, all of us have talked about. It's still challenging to get people into the Bitcoin economy, the Ethereum economy, and other cryptocurrency economies. It sounds like an easy problem. The software is built, the infrastructure is there, it's waiting. But how do we get them on? So we have some homework to do from the Gemini corner, and we're going to keep thinking on this.
Yeah, thanks so much to all our speakers today for your very good insights into this topic. And like every green shoot session, I look forward to the green shoots moment, which over to Pat for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's the way we roll at Green Shoots. We like to finish the session off on a high. And so let me start with you, Mike, and I'll ask this to Dante and Tyler as well. So can you share with us a positive news story that has either inspired you personally or professionally, that you've read maybe in the last week or so, that you can share with the audience? I think mine is certainly the Great Correction. It's another plug for the Great Correction, but please take us away with that.
Unfortunately, I haven't had time to read something in the last week or so. I think, but the important thing, or kind of that inspirational thing that kind of keeps me up, and keeps me going, right? Not keeps me up from a worrisome perspective, but keeps me going, is that the resiliency of people, right? And despite these kind of depressing times, or where there's more nationalism and there's more divide, there's a lot of unity towards working together. And that's why we were talking about collaboration in this space. But it's not only within the service providers like us, but you see people through digital media coming together. Obviously, there's elements of fake and all these things that happen as well, but there's a lot of unity and collaboration that's happening. And when we put these together, we see a momentum growth towards economic rebound or prosperity. And that's why we believe, as a service provider, we have a key role in bringing back the economy and people together. And that means working with regulators, because as a service provider, there's an ecosystem. We work with regulators, we have customers, and we have peers. So when we all, the ecosystem, work together, I think that's going to be the moment where we can go to the next level, and that's exciting.
Yeah, no, it sure is. And I think the resilience of people is a beautiful thing. There's no doubt about that. So Tyler, can you share your green shoot story with the world?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question today, and I don't have an article per se, but just sort of reflecting on where we started, or at least where the industry was when I got involved in 2012. and really how far it's come. When I first learned about crypto, it was actually I first learned about Bitcoin because there was nothing else other than Bitcoin. So Ethereum hadn't been invented yet, and so much hadn't happened. It was still an open question if it was going to be outlawed or legal or not in the United States. I actually got subpoenaed by regulators when they learned I owned Bitcoin. So the fact that we're sitting here now talking to MAS and sitting here having this conversation, it's a dream come true. How much has happened, how far we've come. It's amazing, and it's great how we never let ourselves get complacent. All of us, like, we want more, it's not enough. You know, our work is never done, but it's good to step back once in a while and sort of smell the roses and take stock of and have gratitude for how much has happened. It's still the bottom of the first inning. There's so much more to go, but we've covered some incredible ground and made some incredible progress. And I think this virtual conference is evidence of that. So that's what I'm grateful for. Thank you.
That's great to hear. And yeah, a lot has happened. There's no doubt about that. And it's good to kind of pause and reflect on these things and appreciate where we currently are. So Dante, please take us away with your green shoot story.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I would first echo everything Mike said and everything Tyler said, and acknowledge MAS for pulling together tonight's conversation. The thing I think we all should be hopeful for is that the world needed a solidarity moment, and Mother Nature, sadly, with this COVID-19 pandemic, has thrown it our way, and with it, it has revealed every single corner of opportunity and improvement. And I think the same way that Bitcoin was born from you know, the 2008 recession and crisis, new things will be born from this one too, and institutions will be renewed. And like tonight's conversation, I think what we will see if we get it all right is all ships can indeed rise, and we can try to improve along the way. So I remain eternally optimistic that we will innovate our way through this crisis.
Very eloquently put there, Dante. So all that's left now is to thank our panelists. So thanks, Mike. Thank you. Thanks, Dante. And thanks, Tyler, especially those dialing in. You know, you've stayed up extremely late for this, so much appreciated, and a big warm thank you. And so just to kind of leave off this session, basically, is, you know, we'll have a number of Green Shoots episodes between now and the Singapore FinTech Festival, which is in December. And so that's kind of the main feast, and we'll have, you know, a week long of content. There'll be lots of opportunities, and the focus of this is, you know, clearly, as I mentioned, around the recovery, but also people. You know, how do we support people, the resilience of people, upskilling, reskilling, all of these activities you'll start to see during the week-long festival. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to specifically mention is that we have over 40 cities that are taking part in this event around the world. And so it's a global movement. Everyone's going to be playing a role in terms of helping society get back on its feet, in terms of the public sector and the private sector coming together. And for my payments colleagues here, in particular the Queen of Payments, she'll be involved in a number of sessions that will be running in terms of panels and keynotes throughout the week as well. And so make sure you stay tuned for that. So thank you very much, and happy Thursday, everyone.